Okay, let's start with your name and spell it completely, including your family name.
Okay. Natalia, N-A-L-I-A, Hochman, Hochman, Bloom, B-L-U-M.
And then your birth date and current age.
March 11, 1924, 73 years old.
And where were you born?
In Sambor, Poland.
What large town would that be near? What part of Poland?
This would be the eastern part of Poland, which is now the western part of the Ukraine.
And then what were the names of your parents and brothers, sisters?
What, please? I'm sorry.
Names of your parents, family members?
Paul and Maria Blom. Mother's maiden name is Backenroth. And please don't ask me to spell it.
Okay. It's written down. And siblings, you had a brother?
I have only one brother, Emil Blum, who lives now in Israel, Haifa.
Okay, let's start with what your early family life was like. What did your parents do in Sambor?
My mother, of course, was a wife, a mother, and a housewife. My father had a wholesale of shoes for the entire area. And we seen very little of our father because most of the time he was on the road going to areas where the shoes were manufactured. But we had, of course, my mother and my father's mother, plus a governess, Miss Anja.
Well, what do you remember about your mother and father? How would you describe them?
Well, my mother was much younger than my father, over 10 years younger than himself, and very pretty, very vivacious, full of life. My father was a very intelligent man, but very quiet man. And of course, as I said, as a child, when we woke up, he was already gone. When he came home, we were already in bed. We seen him practically during the weekend, if he was in the area and not on a business trip.
So how do you suppose that affected your growing up and your family life?
I consider this normal because I didn't know different. So, under no stretch of imagination could you have called this dysfunctioning family. It was just a family as I thought it should be.
And what was your brother like growing up?
He was more like my father. He was a handsome little boy, very quiet, very, very quiet, and as a very little child, extremely shy. And that's all I can tell you. I took always whatever I wanted from him. I was the older one. Of course, now he is older, you see, so.
What standard of living did your family have at the time?
I would say it was more above average for Polish circumstances. I would consider here in the United States approximately a middle class.
And what were you like when you think back on your youth?
I don't know, according to my mother, I was a sickly child. According to how I felt about not so much myself as the life in this small town. I always found it very confining, particularly after I have become older.
Well, what was your town like in your community?
It was a kind of neat little town with lots of antiquity. And there was two men's gymnasium and one private girl gymnasium. And it had sustained itself from the court. It was regional court in the area, so this was one type of business. Then it had lots of doctors for a small town like it was, and the military. On the whole, I would say intellectually was much more advanced than most of the little towns in Poland.
What kind of plans did you have for yourself if the war hadn't come along?
Well, there was no such a thing as sending a girl to college, okay? So you finish the high school and you got married. You all were school in humanities, so you can talk, converse on most of the subjects outside the politics. And you planned on getting married and being wife, mother, and a hostess to represent your husband. And this was the extent of aspirations.
In what way was your family Jewish, if that was a part of
they
it?
just were. No,
Was it
but
a religious family?
no. My grandfather on mother's side, of course I never met the grandfather on father's side, was much more religious than we. We have observed all the holidays, but we were what one called in Poland assimilated. So the house wasn't kosher and Yiddish never was spoken. And that's about all I can tell you about this. I really sincerely feel that Hitler made me a Jew.
Could you explain that a bit more? How did you become more Jewish because of the
To
war?
begin with, if somebody tells me that I am not supposed to be something, you can bet I will be, period. Secondary, I felt that we as a group, because we cannot call ourselves a nation, have contributed enough to welfare of the world to deserve a much better treatment than put in cattle cars and slaughtered like animals.
How did you and your family get along with the non-Jewish population of your town?
Until the war, beautifully. Absolutely, barely knew the difference.
So the standard image of Poland as an anti-Semitic culture, you didn't find
Extremely
that?
so. But in the classroom, you know, I don't think it made that much difference. At least I didn't feel it. I was accepted.
And your parents, say they're teaching to you, did they have any general attitude about the non-Jewish population? Was there like a family culture about that?
Well, it certainly wasn't a hostile under no stretch of imagination. And it was coexistence. My father's best friend was one was Volksdeutsche, a doctor, and another was a professor at high school level uh, who was a Ukrainian. I mean, we never looked at people as someone who, this one is Jewish, this one isn't. I would be much more inclined to do this today than I was then.
What was your knowledge of the developments in Germany throughout the 30s as Hitler became more
Oh, we
influential?
followed the newspaper, we knew, but my parents, who both were from German culture, brought up in Austria type of regime, they felt that the Germans are too cultured to do anything perverse. They felt maybe there will be certain amount of prosecution, possibly they will force us to work in demeaning labor type of thing, but never thought that it was question of life or death.
Were you involved at all in Zionism or any other types of Jewish
Oh,
groups,
no,
anything like
no.
that?
I went one time, I remember. Miss Anja didn't show up on, it was Saturday or something like this. So I was unescorted, and of course I heard from other girls there is dancing and so forth. Sure enough, I went. When my father found out, he gave me terrible spanking. It was against the school law. You couldn't belong to any type of Zionist organization. And this was my end of my career as a Zionist.
Do you know anything about why there was a rule against that kind of group?
I thought maybe there is something wrong with the organization. I never really thought much about this. No, no was no, and that's it. And this was the first time my father, and the only time, ever raised his hand to me. So that was very
What did he
persuasive.
say? What was his explanation for being
Just,
so angry?
there was no explanation. You didn't give children explanation then. You said no, and this was it.
So he didn't want you involved in any pro-Palestinian?
I really don't know why he felt. Also, Poland. And Poland in small town was extremely snobbish. And those organizations were all kinds of kids. There was nothing wrong with them. They just not were the kids you were supposed to associate with. And I think it had more of social significance to my parents than any ideological aspect of it.
You remarked to me earlier that you felt you were very protected as a child, or
Very much so.
in what way?
Well, to begin with, my mother always thought that I was a sickly child. I don't know to what extent it was true, but that's what she thought. Secondly, I was always escorted by Miss Anja. I was a laughingstock in high school in first year because she would bring me to school and she would wait for me when I finished. And then Miss Anja got married and immigrated to America with her new husband. And I was for the first time on my own.
And what did you do with that new freedom?
Chances are something stupid. I don't know. I wasn't any different than all the other girls my age. You know.
When did you notice things changing in your community or in that part of Poland? When did things start becoming more dangerous?
Well, the thing started to be more dangerous for us, not for the majority of people, when the Russians came. Now we tried, when the war broke out, to go to Romania. But we did not succeed because the Russians were coming from all sides. So we felt we are just as well off going back home. But when we came home, the Russians already occupied our apartment, so there was no home to be had. And my grandfather was already an uncle arrested. And we found out that we are on a list to be sent to Siberia. The moment we found this out, my parents, not myself, we moved to Stri. It wasn't far, but both the transportation and the communication was almost non-existent. So if you move practically next door, you disappear. So,
Do you remember when the war broke out and the next few days, what that was like for you?
for me,
When your family decided to go to Romania?
well, as I said, we were on the road in some obscure little town not far from Romanian border. And it seemed I couldn't understand why my parents were so afraid of them, because it seemed like lots of fun. The soldiers came with their harmoshkas, the concertinas, you know, and play music on the street and dance. And I thought they are very amiable people. And then, of course, we had to get back on our buggy and the horses and go back to Sambor.
Well, being a protected child as you had been, how did you feel about there being a war on and that you're fleeing your home? How did you react to that?
I see this as a big adventure. My parents seeing it as a big danger. So
then when you went back to your hometown, your home was taken over by Russians?
well, as I understand, and we were not there, first the German came for, I believe, 2 or 3 days. And then the Russians took over. This was this secret agreement that Russia had with Germany. And they took over. And when we came back, of course, we bought Milek and myself, went back to school, and parents found a room that they could rent, and father tried to get a job, and as I said, in not too long of a period, we left for Stri.
And where is that town? Is that a Polish town also?
Oh yes, it's a Polish town. It's in Poland. Also not too big of a town, maybe a little bit bigger population-wise and territory than Sambor, but not much more.
What made your parents believe that would be advantageous to go there?
Well, to begin with, as I said, there was no communication. You could assume change your papers, and which my father did for himself. and got a job as a bookkeeper in one of those, what you call them, group of stores that were making and selling under Russian regime shoes. So since he knew something about the shoes, he took on the job of a bookkeeper.
So the idea of moving was to hide your Jewish
Yeah,
identity if
not to be
possible?
sent to Siberia.
What did you manage to take with you from your upper class
Oh,
home?
this was a scream because we had everything but the practical things. And there was, I remember when we unpacked, it was unreal because there was my mother's evening ball gown and one shoe. And let's see what else was there. Some things that were usable, but the fact remains for quite a while, I didn't mention it, we were dispersed, like mother with Milek were at her sister's place in Truskaviec. I and my father were in Stry. Toward the end of that particular year, we got together, all together in Stry, so Milek can start going to school. And
So it sounds like when the war started, that brought you and your father closer together.
I really do not feel that we were ever very close together. My father wasn't a very demonstrative person.
Was he in your life
My
physically
mother
more?
was definitely a dominating person in my life, all the way through.
Who do you suppose made the major decisions then about coming and going and what to do?
I honestly do not know. I was too young to understand the complexity of those decision making, and I do imagine both of them made the decision. But
So then, when did you arrive first in Stry, in that part of your life?
yeah,
About when in the war was that?
I think it's in 42, if I am not
So you're still in Sambor for the
no,
first 2 years?
41, 1941. And I don't remember the month. And
What was going on then still in Sambor for that first maybe year and a half
well,
of the
I
war?
wasn't there, and as I said, there were no telephones, there were no facsimile, no television. There was a radio.
Was there a German presence in the town?
What, please?
Was there a German presence after the war started? Or was it?
Only for 3 days in summer. As far as Stry is concerned, I don't know. I haven't been there when they enter.
So it was mostly taken over by the Soviets.
Yes, by the Soviet forces.
So was the fear that your parents felt, was that more about the Russians then than about the Germans?
Yes. They confiscated all our possessions, our apartment, our village, because my grandfather owned the village, and in combination with my parents. And we all of a sudden became persona non grata.
Do you know at all if your parents made any other plans to try to escape, or do anything other than stay hidden?
There was no place to go. Either the Russians were there or the Germans were there. So, where do you go?
Well, during those first maybe year and a half, 2 years of the war, what did you